Hi, welcome to my step-by-step series on DSLR photography. This is going to be the episode 2 in the series where I'm going to be discussing about what is a crop factor, sometimes also known as a crop sensor in the sense of cameras. Next, what is a focal length? How does focal length affect the look and the quality of your photographs? The different types of lenses and what are their usages? Best lens for the job. How to choose a lens for a particular situation. Now, if by any chance you have landed on this video, I recommend watching the series in the order. Also, if you're watching this video on YouTube, then I invite you to visit my website www.motiontuition.com, where you would find a lot of free tutorials. I have other sessions available in various categories, like maybe if you want to learn motion graphics or 2D animation, video editing, 3D modeling, 3D animation, amongst others. You can do that there. And you can even consider subscribing too for as little as 250 rupees per month and get access to the whole library of video sessions which I'm updating on regular basis. Do check out the MT Creative Labs, which you can simply think of as a personalized one-to-one tuition where I teach live and you get to interact with me. I solve your questions which you may face while you're working. You can also get in touch with me through the contact page. I will be happy to answer any of the questions or messages that you may have. If you think you have got some value out of this session, consider subscribing the channel, hit the like button and ring the bell icon so you get regular updates whenever I release my next video. Also, spread the knowledge by sharing this video as much as possible with people interested to learn photography all over the world, because this video can help them immensely in their creative journey. There's a lot of ground to cover, so without further delays, let's get into it. The crop factor. SLRs fall into two major categories, full frame and crop sensor. The term refers to the size of the image sensor in the camera, and they have their advantages and disadvantages over each other. With a bigger image sensor, the individual pixels on the sensor can be made larger. Full frame means a camera with a sensor that's the same size as a piece of 35mm film. Cropped sensor, however, means a camera with a sensor that's smaller than a piece of 35mm film. It's a crop of that larger size. Although full frame and crop sensors are fairly common names for digital camera sensors, some manufacturers refer to cameras and sensors differently. For example, Nikon often refers to its full frame cameras as FX and their crop sensors as DX, while others refer to cameras by sensor size, such as 35mm or maybe APS-C. Notice what you see in the image here. The two images look drastically different. The images captured with the smaller crop sensor looks narrower or more zoomed in, while the image captured with the full frame sensor appears wider. This is the problem that I was referring to earlier. Although the lens and its focal length might be same, capturing the same scene with a smaller sensor than full frame or the 35mm film will yield a different or narrower field of view. SLRs currently come in a range of sizes and weights with a variety of interfaces and features. Their flexibility, performance, and image quality makes them great options for any type of shooter. I'm going to be dropping some links to some of the all-time great crop sensor cameras and even full frames. Be sure to check those out if you haven't still decided on which cameras to buy. However, very soon I'm planning for another video which is going to talk about the biggest questions of all time. Which camera should I buy? So consider subscribing to Motion Tuition and hit that bell icon or the notification icon so that you're not missing any of the awesome upcoming content. Now let's consider an example here. On a Nikon D5300 compared to a D610, the former has a crop sensor and the latter has a full frame sensor. basically a larger sensor. The larger sensor makes it possible to capture an image with very little noise. Now, noise is that speckled, grainy stuff that sometimes appears in an image. You will usually see less noise in a camera with a bigger image sensor. Depth of field is a term that we will look at a little later, but basically it is how deep the focus goes in your image. Sometimes you will want a very shallow depth of field to blur out the background and bring more focus to your subject. A larger sensor allows for much shallower depth of field than a smaller sensor. Smaller sensors, though, let you create smaller cameras, and because they have inherently deeper depth of field, they are great for situations where you want everything from near to far to be in focus. Landscape photography, for example. Finally, cameras with smaller sensors are usually cheaper. A good analogy to understand this effect is by using a real photograph. If you take a real photograph of 8x10 and use the scissors to cut out the edges of the photo to make it a 6x8, you are essentially doing the same thing as a crop sensor. However, there is one catch here: sensor resolution, which can make the image appear more magnified. Don't worry about this for now, as I will be explaining this to you in more detail. Since each digital camera sensor is comprised of millions of pixels, using a smaller sensor size should translate to essentially fewer pixels, right? Not really. If the sensor is made with physically smaller pixels, two sensors could potentially have the same resolution. In some cases, a crop sensor could actually have more pixels than a full-frame sensor. For example, the Nikon D4 has 16 million pixels on its full-frame sensor, measuring 36 by 23.9 mm, while the Nikon D7000 also has 16 million pixels on its 23 by 15.6 mm sensor. With such a drastic difference in sensor size, the difference between the two is the physical size of each pixel. The Nikon D4s have much bigger pixel, while the D7000 pixels are much smaller. So those pixels are basically packed closer together. Now, since smaller pixels translate to more noise and less dynamic range in images, the D7000 in this case simply cannot match the image quality of the Nikon D4 in low light situations. And that's why the manufacturers are so keen on talking about the megapixels rather than the sensor sizes. They want you to pay attention on the fancy megapixel number, and they do not want to mention how small the sensor actually is. Your phone camera might have the same resolution as your DSLR, but it sure does not mean that the two will produce the same quality of images. At the same time, modern crop sensors have gotten very good at handling noise, especially at low to medium ISO levels. In good light, you will have a hard time seeing the difference in image quality between a full frame and probably a crop sensor. So, there are certainly advantages to crop sensor cameras here. Smaller pixels do quite well in good light. So, if two sensors of different sizes but the same resolution perform similarly in daylight, then the camera with a smaller sensor could actually be advantageous for getting closer to the action. Although the image is still getting cropped, it is being magnified at the same time. So that's the catch there. Okay, so that was all about crop sensors and full frames. Now let's get into focal length. Understanding focal length is the key to understanding how your camera works. The focal length of a lens determines what your camera can focus on and how your images are going to turn out. There are a lot of complex parts in a modern camera, but one of the most critical components is the lens. It's the lens that focuses the light from your scene onto the image sensor in your camera, and different lenses will do a better or worse job of focusing that light. A superior lens will yield an image with sharper details, better contrast, richer colors. Also, sometimes a lens just has an indefinable quality that you might prefer, even if you can't identify exactly why. But image quality is not the only thing that separates one lens from another. Every lens is engineered to have a specific focal length. This is the physical length of the lens, and A lens's focal length has a profound impact on what you will see through the lens. This is because focal length determines the lens's field of view. Now, field of view should not be a confusing concept to you because you live with a visual field of view all the time. Right now, your eyes are revealing a certain field of view. Now, if you include the full periphery of your vision, which is this, you could say that your field of view is almost 180 degrees. But a lot of this stuff out here is very indistinct. We think of the effective field of view of the human eye as narrower, somewhere around this, about here. Any lens that offers an equivalent field of view to this is considered a normal lens. On a 35mm film camera or a full-frame digital camera, a 50mm lens will be normal. On a camera with a smaller sensor, and it will be a shorter lens that is normal. A lens with a focal length that is shorter than a normal lens is considered wide angles. With these lenses, you will see much wider field of view than you will with a naked eye or with a normal lens. Lenses with a longer focal length, longer than the normal, are considered telephoto. A telephoto lens has a very narrow field of view, but it also has a lot of magnification power. With it, you can enlarge distant objects. Now, some of these lenses are better for some applications than others. For example, if you were shooting sports or wildlife, subjects which are usually pretty distant, you will want to use a telephoto lens, of course. If you want to capture lots of details in a narrow space, then you might want a wide-angle lens. Focal length is the distance measured in or millimeters between the point of convergence of your lens and the sensor or the film recording of the image. The focal length of your film or the digital camera lens dictates how much of the scene your camera will be able to capture. Smaller numbers have a wider angle of view and show more of the scene, while larger numbers have a narrower angle of view and show less. Technically speaking, the focal length of the lens is the distance between the lens and the image sensor when the subject is in focus, usually stated in mm. For example, 28mm, 50mm or 100mm. In the case of zoom lenses, both the minimum and maximum focal lengths are stated. For example, 18 to 55. Focal lengths can also change the perspective and scale of your images. A lens with a shorter focal length expands perspective, giving the appearance of more space between the elements in your photograph. Meanwhile, the telephoto lenses tend to stack elements in the frame together to compress the perspective. Now let's look at how does focal length affect the look of your image. Focal length impacts the look and the quality of the photograph in several ways. Field of view. The focal length determines how much of a scene is captured in an image. Shorter focal length lenses are called wide-angle lenses because they allow you to get a wider field of view in one image. Lenses with long focal lengths are called telephoto lenses and have a smaller field of view. Depth of field. Lenses with long focal lengths tend to have a shallow depth of field, which means they can focus in on small objects, even far away ones, at specific distance, of course. Meanwhile, lenses with shorter focal lengths have a larger depth of field, which enables them to get a wider range of elements in focus. Perspective. Focal length can also change the perspective and scale of your images. A lens with a shorter focal length expands perspective, giving the appearance of more space between the elements in your photo. Meanwhile, telephoto lenses tend to stack elements in the frame together to compress perspective. Image shake. Now, image shake is the blurriness and reduction in the image quality that occurs from the vibration of pressing down the shutter release right here. Now, when using a long lens with a long focal length and very tight perspective, your camera and the lens are more sensitive to even the slightest of the motion. And logically enough, image shakes can be prevented by using a simple tripod. Now let's compare some focal lengths in camera lenses. There is a wide variety of camera lenses and therefore different focal lengths are available to budding photographers today. Certain lenses are better suited to certain types of photography. For example, ultra-wide angles are great for landscape photography, whereas telephotos are better options for wildlife or sports photography. Ultra-wide angle, which range from focal lengths between the 8mm and 24mm range. These lenses are sometimes called the fisheye lens, which have a very wide viewing area. While they can take an image of up to 180 degrees around the lens, they distort the image quite significantly, making everything appear almost as if inside a sphere. Standard wide angle, focal lengths ranging between 24mm to 35mm. Smaller focal length and a wider angle can distort images. With a lens of this size, distortion is minimal and the image appears more natural. Pretty much everything is in focus unless your subject is very close to the camera and there is less spatial distortion than a very wide angle lens. But it still makes things seem farther away than they actually are. Standard lens. Focal lengths ranging between 35 to 70mm. These versatile lenses are good for just about any type of photography, from portraits to landscapes. These all-in-one lenses render images roughly the way the human eye sees the world, and they easily adjust to a shallow or deep depth of field, depending on the aperture. Telephoto lenses, ranging in the focal range of 70 to 300mm. These lenses are ideal for picking out a distant subject, the way a telescope does. Good for compressing your subject and the background, which makes the background appear much closer to the subject. Telephoto lenses quite often have a shallow depth of field unless everything you are shooting is far away. Now let's look at how to select a camera lens for a particular focal length. Using a telephoto lens for portraits would be awkward as trying to photograph a hippo from afar using only a fixed ultra-wide angle, isn't it? Make sure that you are clear on what you are photographing before jumping in and purchasing a new lens. To help you out with your decision, I try to answer some FAQs and also I provide some links for the best lenses to consider for different situations. Check them out and then decide which ones to buy. Which is the best beginner camera lens? Now, the 50mm, also known as the Nifty 50 or the hand grenade, is by far the most popular starter lens, as it strikes a nice balance between field of view and depth of field and doesn't require any tinkering around with the focal length to produce a crisp image. Travel photography is very unique in that you will want to travel light, but have the option of capturing a lot of detail. A standard zoom lens allows you to adjust your focal length, giving you enough flexibility to get each shot. Next up, which is the best lens for sports photography? Well, telephotos outnumber all the other lenses here. Telephoto zoom lenses offer longer focal lengths that are ideal for capturing action-packed scenes from afar. Best lens for landscape photography. Now, before heading out on an outdoor adventure, consider grabbing two lenses specifically, a wide angle or even an ultra wide angle, as well as a standard lens. With landscape photography, you want to have the flexibility to capture both scale and detail. Which is the best lens for portrait photography? Well, fixed lenses, also known as the prime lenses, with focal lengths between 35 to 70mm make great portrait lenses. The lack of zoom options on a fixed lens ensures clarity of image for portraits. So no fuzzy or blurry faces. Best lens for macro photography. A macro lens anywhere in the range of 85mm to 200mm is best for macro photography. The focal length of this powerful lens can capture subtle and even the minutest detail from afar. Best lens for architecture photography. A standard wide-angle lens features a decent field of view to capture most, if not all, of a building or a cityscape. Best lens for street photography. As with portrait photography, street photography benefits from the unique, clear look that the standard fixed lenses produce. If you want to get creative, however, opt for a standard zoom lens and use focal lengths to play around with your subject's size in relation to the background. Best lenses for wildlife photography. Well, telephoto lenses come in handy for potentially dangerous situations or scenarios in which you want to maybe capture a scene without disturbing the nature or the subjects. Wildlife can be very unpredictable, and a telephoto lens with a long focal length can help ensure that you keep enough safe distance between yourself and the wildlife while still getting that amazing shot.